It wasn't a rally. It wasn't a press conference filled with flashing bulbs or roaring applause. It was something quieter, something heavier. Barack Obama stood before a modest podium in a community hall in Pennsylvania, his sleeves rolled up, his face carved with the wear of years he never stopped carrying. This wasn't about politics anymore. This was about warning a nation before the storm. This isn't about partisanship, he began. It's about democracy. And it's about whether this country wants to keep it. The room fell silent, as if the air itself had stopped to listen. The former president had delivered countless speeches before. But this one wasn't crafted for elegance. It was fire wrapped in calm. His voice didn't tremble, but you could feel the urgency behind every word. The calm before the second storm. Donald Trump's second campaign wasn't subtle. He didn't disguise the blueprint. Mass deportations, the use of the military against civilians if needed, new loyalty tests for civil servants, direct attacks on independent institutions, and full immunity from prosecution. These weren't promises, they were warnings. And Obama knew the script. Because he had once read between the lines when no one else did. Because history had taught him, loud tyrants rarely come in silence, but democracies fall quietly. We've seen this movie before, he said. It's playing out across the world, one norm at a time. One law at a time. And if we're not careful, it will play here too. He didn't name other countries. He didn't need to. You think it can't happen here? He paced slightly, hands interlocked, his eyes meeting people across the room. Teachers. Factory workers. Retired veterans. Students. I get it. You're tired. You want the noise to stop. But the silence that follows? That's not peace. That's submission. What unnerved many was how calmly he said it. No fear-mongering. No hysteria. Just a man who had seen the slow erosion of truth, one grain at a time, and returned to say it out loud before the ground disappeared. This was not the 2008 Obama. This wasn't, "Yes we can." This was the man who understood what happens when nations stop paying attention. And behind every sentence lay a simple truth. The next time you hear someone say, "He's just being tough," remember, strong men don't build nations. They hollow them out. No applause line. There was no catchphrase. No campaign slogan. Just a warning. He spoke of judges being hand-picked not for their fairness but their loyalty. Of the Department of Justice being molded into a personal tool. Of immigration not being reformed, but weaponized. And of something deeper. We think democracy is an inheritance. It's not. It's a decision. Every generation must choose it again. It wasn't just about Trump. It was about what Trumpism meant. About a culture that began celebrating cruelty, mistaking it for strength. About a people slowly becoming numb to overreach. About how even the best systems rot, not from outside, but from within. The last alarm. Obama's words weren't designed to win him anything. He had no more elections left to run. But that gave him power. And his warning wasn't just for liberals. It was for independents. It was for conservatives who still believed in the Constitution over a cult. I'm not here to save the Democratic Party. I'm here to remind you that no party is bigger than a republic. The camera lights blinked red. The speech ended. He didn't stay for photos. He shook a few hands. Hugged a former coal worker in the front row. Then left, no fanfare. No closing anthem. But the echo of his words stayed in the air. If you don't vote against autocracy, your silence will be remembered louder than your voice. That night, the speech was barely covered by cable news. But by morning, it had already begun spreading online. Not because of slick production. But because it hit something raw. Something most Americans weren't ready to admit. That their democracy might need defending, from themselves. It wasn't written in secret. There was no hidden vault, no encrypted server, no anonymous whistleblower leaking the plan to the press. Donald Trump's second-term blueprint was public, painfully so. It was posted, spoken, tweeted, and shouted into microphones. The danger wasn't in its secrecy. It was in how loudly it was ignored. Barack Obama understood this better than most. His warnings weren't based on fear of a man, but the machinery that was slowly being re-oiled beneath him. And the terrifying truth? He's not hiding it this time. A doctrine of disobedience. In conservative think tanks and far-right circles, a term kept circulating like a virus with no antidote, the unitary executive theory. To most, it sounded academic. Harmless. To Obama, it was a red siren. The theory proposed that the president held nearly unchecked power over the executive branch, meaning loyalty not to the Constitution, but to the man in office. Under Trump's plan, any civil servant, military officer, or DOJ official unwilling to bend to his agenda would be removed. Obama, in his post-presidency briefings and quiet discussions with scholars and journalists, saw where it was going. And it chilled him. This isn't about government reform. This is about obedience, he told a close group of former national security advisors. At the center of Trump's second-term ambitions was the resurrection of Schedule F, a bureaucratic tool that would allow him to fire tens of thousands of federal workers, and replace them with loyalists. Imagine the IRS, the EPA, and the DOJ being staffed by people whose only qualification is loyalty to one man, Obama warned in a closed-door session. The second inauguration nobody expected. Behind closed curtains, in think tanks funded by obscure political operatives, Trump's allies weren't dreaming about infrastructure bills or economic reform. They were crafting tools of political survival. Weaponized prosecutions against opponents. A purged intelligence community. A Justice Department that served personal vendettas. This wasn't policy. This was personal revenge, repackaged as governance. And Obama, who had spent 8 years preserving the institutional integrity of those agencies, even when it cost him politically, watched the scaffolding of democracy being quietly dismantled. He didn't say Trump was a dictator. He doesn't need to be a dictator to break the system. He just needs to convince people it's broken enough to burn. Turning bureaucracy into blood sport. Trump and his inner circle knew the average American didn't care about bureaucracy. But Obama did. He knew democracy wasn't preserved by the big speeches, but by the anonymous analyst at the CDC, the career diplomat in Ukraine, the DOJ lawyer refusing to write an unlawful memo. These were the real guardians of democracy. And they were all marked. They want to replace the immune system of our democracy with cells that only respond to him. Obama's tone turned graver in smaller meetings. While the press hunted headlines, he dissected the architecture of Trump's plan. He's not rewriting the rules. He's rewriting the referees. The strategy of spectacle. In early 2024, Trump held a rally in Nevada where he waved a packet of paper labeled Day One orders. Cameras zoomed. The crowd roared. The documents weren't shown to the press. But Obama had already read versions of them, drafted by former insiders turned architects of chaos. That's not a campaign plan. That's a coup in slow motion. He wasn't being dramatic. One draft memo outlined how Trump could invoke the Insurrection Act to deploy the military domestically, against protests, against perceived threats, even against political events deemed unsafe. They won't need to send tanks. Just fear. And fear, Obama knew, didn't need orders. It needed silence. Compliance. Obama's counterattack, words over walls. Obama didn't run for anything. He didn't launch a shadow campaign. But he started something else, an offensive of information. In town halls, college campuses, community centers, he mapped the plan for anyone willing to listen. This isn't just about Trump. It's about the soil. Democracy doesn't collapse in a roar. It withers in a whisper. Barack Obama. The danger wasn't just in what Trump was planning, it was in what others refused to say. Capitol Hill wasn't on fire. The White House hadn't declared martial law. Courts were still open. But Barack Obama could feel it in the halls of power, in the carefully measured pauses of Republican lawmakers, in the spineless evasions of Sunday morning pundits. They knew. And yet, they said nothing. A different kind of coup. Obama had studied authoritarian regimes. The dissent rarely started with gunfire. It started with complicity. Silence. Denial. Laughter. Excuses. That was what frightened him now, not the brute force of Trump's plan, but the eerie calm around it. This isn't a coup with tanks. It's a coup with calendars, he told a group of former aides. Day by day, agency by agency, the groundwork was being poured. A second Trump term wouldn't need chaos. It would require only inaction from those sworn to prevent it. And that's exactly what he saw. The courts. Packed and politicized. The Senate. Frozen in partisanship. The media. Distracted by spectacle. The people. Tired. Cynical. Divided. Obama knew it was a perfect storm. If no one sounds the alarm, then the house will burn in silence. The quiet retreat of conscience. He wasn't alone in this fear. There were whispers, conservative columnists who hinted at concern, former military leaders who raised eyebrows in private. But when the microphones appeared, their words softened into euphemisms. A break from tradition. Unorthodox tactics. An aggressive use of executive authority. Obama winced at every sanitized headline. When you start describing autocracy as strategy, you've already surrendered. He remembered the January 6 hearings. The testimonies. The footage. And then, the silence. The lack of consequences. The normalization. It was as if America had agreed to forget. Because remembering meant doing something about it. Obama watched, powerless but alert, as Trump rebranded his crimes as campaigns. He saw former enablers now reapplying for positions of power under the guise of patriotism. They're not preparing for government. They're preparing for vengeance. Behind closed doors, a warning. At a closed-door fundraiser in Chicago, Obama finally broke form. It wasn't a rally. It wasn't televised. But someone recorded it. The clip would later leak online and go viral. In it, Obama leaned into the microphone and said, "He will break the things that cannot be rebuilt. Not because he's evil. But because he's empty." The room fell into stunned silence. He went on. "Institutions don't protect us. People do. And people are failing." That moment marked a shift. A moral challenge. Not just to Trump, but to every leader too afraid to name the fire. The memo he never wanted to write. Weeks later, Obama sat at his desk, writing a letter. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't meant for the public. It was addressed to 5 sitting Republican senators, men he'd once had lunch with, negotiated with, even trusted. In it, he wrote, "History doesn't care about your donors. It cares about what you defended when it was hardest to speak." None of them replied. But a staffer from one office quietly slipped him a message. They're terrified. Not of Trump. Of their own voters. Obama folded the letter away. He didn't publish it. He didn't shame them on stage. But he didn't forget. Tyranny doesn't need loyalty. It only needs silence. Whispers turn into roars. Something was changing. Slowly. Young staffers in Congress began leaking documents to journalists. Retired generals spoke with more urgency. Local news stations started investigating. Barack Obama knew Donald Trump didn't want a presidency, he wanted a throne. And the scariest part? Millions were already calling him king. This wasn't about policy anymore. This was about power, raw, unchecked, personal power. The kind that bends laws, silences opposition, and rewrites history in real time. And if Trump returned, it wouldn't be as a president constrained by tradition. It would be as a monarch of grievance. A campaign built like a kingdom. While cable news argued over debate performances and poll numbers, Obama saw what others didn't. Trump wasn't running a campaign. He was building a court. Look at the people around him, Obama told a journalist off-record. They're not advisors. They're loyalists. Enforcers. Trump's inner circle was no longer filled with traditional strategists. It now included former military hardliners, conspiracy theorists, and media manipulators. Many openly calling for mass firings of federal workers, censorship of critics, even the jailing of political opponents. The deep state narrative had become a sword. Schedule F was the dagger. This isn't rhetoric. This is preparation. In a leaked planning document, one aide reportedly described the next administration as a hostile corporate takeover of the U.S. government. They weren't hiding their intent. They were daring America to stop them. Obama watched with growing dread. We fought a revolution to escape a king. Now we're letting one campaign like Caesar. Rebuilding the guardrails. Obama could not stop Trump alone. But he could rebuild the defenses Trump would need to destroy. He met with constitutional scholars, civil society leaders, former Republican officials. Not to strategize political wins, but to reinforce the very idea of limits. The goal is not to win power. It's to protect the place where power must answer to law. He supported the launch of a bipartisan watchdog group focused solely on executive overreach. He consulted with civic educators to develop curriculum about democratic backsliding. He helped establish a digital toolkit for identifying authoritarian language in media. Some mocked it. Others ignored it. But a few listened, and acted. In Virginia, a school district began hosting monthly democracy nights. In Michigan, a coalition of pastors warned their congregations about the seduction of strongmen. In Arizona, a group of teenage TikTok creators launched a viral campaign, #NotOurKing. We thought the Constitution would always protect us, Obama said. Turns out, it needs us to protect it. The speech heard around the courts. On the anniversary of the Constitution's signing, Obama gave a speech in Philadelphia, this time televised, this time planned. He stood beneath a faded mural of the founders and declared, "The Constitution is not sacred because it's old. It's sacred because it limits every man, no matter how loud, rich, or angry." He didn't name Trump. He didn't have to. He spoke of due process. Separation of powers. The danger of loyalty tests. The tyranny of executive vengeance. And the sacred burden of presidential restraint. The speech didn't trend on Twitter, but it hit the inboxes of law students, federal clerks, and quiet judges across America. A week later, 3 retired Supreme Court justices issued a joint op-ed. No president is above the Constitution, not even one elected by fear. Obama said nothing publicly. But privately, he wept. Sometimes, he whispered, law needs courage to breathe. One letter, one boy. It was a letter from a 12-year-old in Wisconsin that finally broke him. The boy had seen the news. The anger. The threats. The Trump rallies calling to jail traitors and punish judges. He wrote, "My dad says we should leave the country if he wins. But I don't want to leave. I want to stay and help. But I'm scared." Obama read the letter 3 times. Then wrote back. "Bravery is staying when it's hard. And fighting not with fists, but with facts, truth, and kindness. I believe in you." He signed it simply. Barack. It wasn't a policy. It wasn't a speech. But it was a shield. If even one kid chooses courage over fear, he told Michelle, that's how a republic, if you can keep it. Benjamin Franklin. Obama sat alone in his Chicago office, watching the nation sway between memory and amnesia. The institutions still stood. The press still printed. The courts still ruled. But the air had changed. It was thicker, slower, like the breath held before a storm. He had said all he could say. Warned as loudly and as gently as a statesman could. Now, it was up to the Republic to remember who it was. Or forget, and become something else. The quiet mobilization. It didn't start with marches. It started with murmurs. A librarian in Ohio who refused to pull books on authoritarianism from the shelves. A county clerk in Georgia who rejected pressure to manipulate voter rolls. A school board member in Texas who taught actual civics, even as parents shouted in rage. It was small. But it spread. They're waking up, Obama told his former speechwriter. Not with slogans. With service. A movement without a name began to form. A kind of civic immune response. Not radical. Not loud. But stubborn. In a grocery store parking lot in Iowa, a Vietnam veteran pinned a Constitution pocketbook to his truck's rear window. In Oregon, a teenager printed, "American, not subject," on the back of her hoodie. In Florida, a single mother turned her PTA group into a voter registration drive. You don't need a cape to save a republic, Obama whispered to a group of volunteers. You just need to show up. A battle on the ballot. Trump's campaign became more theatrical. Uniformed supporters. Promises of mass firings. Dark warnings about traitors in robes. He vowed to liberate the presidency from its chains. In response, Obama didn't organize protests. He hosted town halls. In basements. Libraries. VFW halls. He sat across from skeptical conservatives, anxious immigrants, disillusioned Gen Z voters. He didn't speak as a president. He spoke as a witness. Freedom doesn't protect itself. That's your job. For every fear Trump stoked, Obama told a story of resistance. A civil rights worker in Alabama. A refugee turned state senator. A janitor who raised a judge. And always, he returned to the Constitution, not as a relic, but as a promise. It doesn't care if you're Democrat or Republican. It only cares that you care enough to defend it. The room never erupted in applause. But people stayed. Listened. Some even cried. We don't need another savior, one woman said after. We just need to remember who we were before we forgot. One last letter. On the eve of the election, Obama sat at his desk and wrote something no one asked for. A letter to the next president. Not for the cameras. Not for the archives. For the soul of the office. You are not the nation. You are its servant. Your power is borrowed, from those who trusted you to return it undamaged. History will forget your victories. But it will never forget your abuses. The hardest part of the presidency isn't leading. It's yielding. To law. To loss. To truth. He signed it simply. Barack Obama. 44th President of the United States. Then he sealed it and placed it where it belonged, on the resolute desk, waiting for whoever came next. The people answer. Election day arrived. The lines were long. The polls were loud. The nerves were frayed. But the turnout? Record-breaking. Not because of a candidate. Because of a question. Do we remember who we are? And in the stillness of early morning, as the final states tipped blue, then red, then back again, Obama didn't refresh the map. He stepped outside. Breathed. Waited. The Republic was speaking. And it remembered. Epilogue, the return of the we. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. Whether Trump returned or not, the people had reawakened. They remembered why the Constitution had clauses, why the branches were separate, why no man, especially the loudest one, could ever be trusted alone. The opposite of authoritarianism, Obama said in his final podcast, isn't anarchy. It's us. Together. He didn't run again. He never could. But he didn't have to. The people had stood. The courts had resisted. The press had persisted. And a nation that flirted with forgetting chose instead to remember. We the people, he said, raising a glass at a small dinner with veterans, teachers, and janitors. Turns out that's still the most powerful office in the land.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that move the world. Thanks for watching.